Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective, and today I have a very interesting laptop for us to take a look at. So let me go ahead and get it off the floor. Okay, for those of you that are very astute, you'll notice that this isn't a laptop yet. It is inside a bag that very likely may have carried this. So if we open this up, we can get our beastie for today. And here it is. Let's get all this out of the way and take a look at what we're dealing with. This, ladies and gentlemen, is none other than the Dell Latitude E6420 XFR, also known as the P21G. And this is a ruggedized laptop. And oh boy, is this thing ever rugged. We'll take a tour of this machine in just a second, but let's talk about some numbers first. The chassis is actually made out of a PR72 polymer with a magnesium roll cage, very similar to ThinkPads if they took steroids. Then we have all of the tests that this thing passed. So this passed a series of tests. It passed the military standard 810G and 461F test, along with a few others I'll put up on the screen. Bottom line, this can survive a 6-foot fall, no problem, 3 feet if it lands on the screen with it open. It can handle pouring rain, 70 mile per hour winds, temperatures as low as -20 Fahrenheit and as high as, I believe, 145 Fahrenheit. So that's pretty extreme. And it's also designed to handle working in explosive environments with like gas fumes and all of that good stuff. And that's because this thing is essentially sealed. The interior components, when this thing is working properly, have no access to the outside environment. And we'll see that as we go throughout. Let's go ahead and take a tour of this machine. I will let you know that it weighs just shy of 9 pounds, this particular version, so it's not exactly what you would call a thin and light. On the left-hand side, if you're facing the machine, we have a series of sealed doors. The first sealed door reveals a serial connector as well as your VGA connector. Now, a serial connector, you might ask, well, why would you have one of these still? A lot of legacy equipment used to program radios, specifically military ones, still have those serial connectors. So having a modern machine with that connector means you don't have to dig out the XP laptop from the quartermaster every time you have to program the radio. Moving over here, we do have one of the cooling vents, and I almost want to use air quotes, and you'll see why in a second, why I call this a vent. Next over here, under our other door, we have the hard drive caddy, and we also have the smart card reader just above that. So if we go ahead and pull this tab, our drive, which is very, very snugly secured, will eventually make its way out. There we go. So as you can see, that is snugly in there. You don't need to worry about that coming out by accident. That's for darn sure. With that back in place, we'll continue our tour of the device. Under here, we do have a spot for the SD card. It's hidden under kind of where the handle is, but it's got a little door. You put the SD card in there, you close it up, it's good to go. This model does come with the elusive touchscreen, so we do have the lanyard with the comically irritating pen to use. Moving along to the other side here, we have another door, and this door holds all sorts of different things. So let's go ahead and pop that open. We have our headphone microphone combo jack. We have our express card slot here. We have 2 times USB 2.0. We have our Wi-Fi kill switch, and then we have a media bay. And this media bay is hot swappable. So There was all sorts of things that could fit in the slot. This one currently has just a standard DVD-ROM, but there was all sorts of things from USB 3.0 modules to extra batteries. This was one that would even make the Ultra Bay on ThinkPads kind of blush and say, dang, you can put a lot of stuff in that. So the last drawer that we have access to contains HDMI out and then an eSATA port. And interestingly enough, this actually has a locking mechanism to keep this from opening. And then along the backhand side, we have another slot that has a lock. This one is for your power plug. This is actually our battery compartment. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then over here is our network door. Taking a look at the bottom of the machine, we can see a variety of interesting things. The first thing is the dock door, if you will. So a dock can be inserted on these if this door is open. And you'll also see two keyboard screws, which are part of the disassembly of this machine. Now over here, this is what they called their quad cool sealed, essentially thermal chamber. So the CPU and the internals under normal conditions are not exposed to any of the outside elements. So the air that's circulating through here is not circulating through the entire case, it is only circulating through this chamber, which is a pretty neat way of solving that problem. Unfortunately, you can see that this laptop would have had to have been decommissioned due to this damage here on the access cover. Last thing that we'll take a look at is the removal of the battery, and this is kind of a complex approach. So the first thing that we can do is open the battery door, like so, and then if we take these two tabs and essentially operate them, we can pull this huge grab bar that has been, for all intents and purposes, glued to this battery for its removal. As far as I can tell, this was sold as one piece. It wasn't just a kit. Originally, this was a 60 watt-hour battery, and if it had charge, most reviewers were able to get anywhere from 6 to 8 hours of operation with this thing at full capacity. So now that we've gone ahead and toured those features, let's go ahead and open this thing up and take a look at its user interface. So the first thing that we do have is, of course, a trackpad. These buttons are soft and squishy, but they are sealed up, which is, you know, par of the course for a ruggedized laptop. Over on this side, we do have volume controls, our power button, and this keyboard is backlit in like Army logistics tent red, I'm going to call it. Nothing else looks quite like that shade of red if you haven't seen it in real life. We are equipped on this model with the fancy schmancy touchscreen version, and that is indicated by the pen, of course. But these also came in a variety of other display configurations. And there's also a web camera up there, which is surprisingly decent for what would be essentially a government purchase laptop. Let's talk about some specifications. This came essentially in three major varieties, the i3, an i5, and an i7. I couldn't find any specific information on what the i3 looked like, but the i5 was a 2520 and the i7 was a 2620. These also came equipped with optional GPUs, such as the NVIDIA NVS 4200M, and that was a 512 megabyte card. If that wasn't equipped, you were looking at HD Graphics 3000. The RAM in this was a maximum of 8 gigabytes with 2 sticks of 4, so you weren't handling a lot of tasks, but for CPUs of that generation, much more RAM than that, especially in the conditions that this would have been used running the software that it would have been running, probably would have been slightly redundant. The screen up here came essentially in two varieties, a 1366 by 768 non-touch display and a touch display. So there's no HD resolution screens in these, unfortunately, but that would probably be kind of a negative factor considering the environments that these would be in, and battery consumption would be more important than that sort of thing. The very first thing that we are going to do is we are actually going to disassemble parts of this laptop. Now, The first thing that you would normally do, and this will be no exception, is we need to go ahead and remove the battery. So as we saw before, that's not a terribly difficult affair. We just actuate these battery tabs and we're able to remove the battery. And at this point, there are two major things that we can access. The first is the keyboard and the second is the removal of this bottom case. And according to the manual, there is 23 screws. Son of a... Okay, well, there's no time to get started like the present, so let's grab our toolkit and go ahead and open this up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, oh, look at that, it's 24. Is that all of them? Please tell me that's all of them. With all of those screws out, the cover actually more or less just kind of lifts out of place, which is nice, I'm not gonna lie. There is this one massive captive screw that's just gonna hang out in there. And I might see about using some methods I know to at least semi-patch that up. On the inside here, we pretty much have access to all the main components, and you can kind of see how this sealed up chamber works. So we have air essentially being drawn in from the bottom, and it gets passed around here and then passed through the cooler and then out through this exhaust port. But there is a gasket that runs all the way around this side here, and you can see that same gasket inside here. That means that no air or anything that goes through that fan system ends up inside the machine anywhere. And you can just see how insanely robust this interior chassis is. Like, this is crazy. We do have our 2 RAM slots down here. It looks like we're actually rocking 6 gigs in this. We've got 1 stick of 4 and then 1 stick of 2 on top. So we're 2 below that threshold. We can see the heat pipe covering the CPU, and then we have this little arm that extends over what is most undoubtedly the NVIDIA GPU. Hanging out over here, we have the LAN card, and then we have a series of unoccupied slots over here for other expansion configurations. But beyond that, you are looking at more or less everything that you would see on this side. The only other thing to do is to quickly examine what is under the keyboard area. Now, to do the disassembly for the keyboard, what we need to do is remove the 2 screws that are labeled keyboard. And these screws, thankfully, are actually accessible without the need of removing this panel. Now, because this machine is so thick, these screws are going to be very difficult to extract. So we're going to use a magnet to pull those out. With those 2 screws out of the way, we're going to go ahead and turn the machine over and open it up, and we're going to have to remove this bottom trim piece. Once this bottom trim piece is removed, this simply will come up and out of the way. And then we have 2 additional screws that are holding the keyboard in place. And I'm just noticing it now, and maybe you noticed it on the film. Oh, pardon me, there's 2 more here. There are no plastic clips that I have disengaged disassembling the entire thing. This is all just screwed together. I haven't heard any clicks or latches disengaging. The keyboard, I suspect, will probably be that exception. Yeah, there we go, a few pops. But you know what, that's still pretty darn impressive in my book. Okay, and after this point, we then need to remove this panel to then gain access to essentially where the ribbon is plugged in to the main board. So you kind of get the idea. This thing is incredibly well sealed. It doesn't look like liquid would necessarily drain out of this recess, but it would sit on top and it would literally have absolutely nowhere to go. What we're going to do is we are going to put this all back together and we're going to turn it on and we're going to mess around with it for a little bit. All right, so before I reassemble this bottom panel, I just want to do my best to minimize this as an ingress point. It won't be perfect because I won't be able to replace this part, but I have something that I used to use in a job of mine many years ago. It's called gun tape. Imagine duct tape if it essentially got out of hand. This might look really dirty, but that's because this will bond to pretty much anything forever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off a tiny piece that we can sculpt into that ingress point just to help it out in the future so it doesn't become an issue. Right, there we go. Doesn't look like much, but I know from experience that that's going to be enough to help it out. All right, now that we have this thing all the way back together, let's go ahead and turn it on and see what it's like. So this is using a mechanical hard drive, so it's not going to win any speed awards, that's for darn sure. One thing I will mention while this thing is starting up is that to get the touchscreen working, I had to install the drivers found on Dell's website. If you try and use the drivers that come natively with Windows, then you are going to be out of luck. Those just don't work. They either invert the touch input or it's just complete and utter gibberish. Okay, here we go. We are booted into Windows, and as I mentioned, the touchscreen on this model does work, thankfully. If you want the place to download the files, I'll leave that in the description down below. Like I kind of mentioned in the specifications list, it's a that'll do. Equivalently, you're looking at kind of the specs of an X220 kind of mashed into one of these incredibly rugged cases. When these things were brand new, they garnered prices of around as low as $4,500 American dollars, I believe, all the way up to $5,600 American dollars. So if you don't mind like not having state-of-the-art specs, but you need to have something that you can absolutely abuse, no questions asked, these are showing up used for anywhere from $300 to $1,000. And if you need a machine that has actually a decent port selection and can just take anything that you're reasonably going to dish out on it, this is an excellent machine to consider, especially if you think about what they used to cost. So here's the thing, before we close this video, I'll be honest, I can't believe that I got permission to do what I'm about to do, because this is not my laptop. So, without further ado. Okay, so we're out here doing some testing on this outside, so I'm just going to go get some tools, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it lived. It's still here. So if you enjoy this sort of content and would like to see more, please like the video, share it, hit subscribe, and wherever your notification bell is, make sure you're hitting that too. And if I ever get the chance to do a durability test like this again, you'll be the first to know. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.